Garrick and Zaza told us they left their homes in Russia.
New video of what Putin is doing to his own soldiers. Video that appears to be Russian soldiers banished to a dark concrete cellar for refusing to return to the front line in Ukraine.
We have information that the Russian military has been actually executing soldiers who refuse to follow orders.
Something crazy is unfolding inside Russia's war in Ukraine. An estimated 50,000 Russian soldiers have deserted the battlefield, choosing to walk away from Putin's army. They're abandoning their units, their commanders, and the fight they were sent to win. For years now, the Kremlin has tried to hide this data, but the scale of these runaway troops is becoming clearer and clearer. These soldiers are risking prison, exile, even death to get out. This has left Putin exposed, to the point that he is now begging for help from North Korea to cover the losses. So what's pushing these soldiers to make such a dangerous choice? In this video, we'll dive into answering that question and explore the growing leak in Russia's war machine and what it means for Russia and ultimately the world. To understand why so many soldiers are fleeing from Putin's ranks, we need to look at what they're really facing on the ground. Simply put, the war, now in its 4th year, looks nothing like what Russian soldiers were promised. Back in February of 2022, Russian troops rolled into Ukraine with a sense of confidence. The Kremlin called it a special military operation, not a war, and the message was loud and clear. This would be quick, clean, and victorious. Soldiers, some barely 20 years old, were told that they'd march in, take control, and be back at home as heroes in a matter of days. They believed the propaganda, expecting to be greeted as liberators by Russian-speaking Ukrainians. But the reality hit like a freight train. Instead of all that, Ukraine fought back hard. Civilians stood their ground, towns didn't fall, and entire cities pushed back, leading to the collapse of Russia's plans. Young soldiers, many with no real combat experience, found themselves in a nightmare they weren't prepared for. That early shock planted doubt. Now that doubt is continuing to spread, and desertions are its clearest sign. Life on the front lines is a big reason why soldiers are leaving. The conditions they face every day are awful. Many are stuck in trenches for months, living in mud and freezing cold. In winter, temperatures can drop to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around -20 degrees Celsius. That's the definition of ice cold. Soldiers often lack proper jackets or boots. Some get frostbite just trying to stay warm. On top of that, food is so scarce that most days they're lucky to get one meal, like a stale piece of bread or a can of meat that's barely edible. Supplies are so limited that some dig trenches with their hands because there aren't enough shovels. Their clothes wear out, their fingers bleed from scraping frozen dirt, and there's no relief in sight. This isn't the strong, well-equipped army the world was told about. It's a system that can't even take care of its own men, and that failure is pushing soldiers to their breaking point. They were promised glory. What they got was frostbite, fear, and a one-way ticket to a war they never chose. And if you believe their voices shouldn't be buried, hit like and subscribe. One click helps these stories break through the silence that Moscow is counting on. Beyond the physical hardship, the mental toll is crushing. Soldiers live with constant fear. Artillery shells explode nearby, making it impossible to sleep. They see their friends die from drones or gunfire with no time to stop and grieve. The stress builds up, leaving many shaking or jumping at every sound. But it's not just the danger. It's the feeling that the war doesn't make sense. The Kremlin told them they were fighting to protect Russian-speaking people or to make Russia stronger. But on the ground, soldiers see destroyed homes and dead civilians. They're told to just keep fighting, but they don't know why. This disconnect eats away at them, day after day. When you're risking your life for something that feels pointless, the mind starts to break. And for many, that's when the urge to run becomes stronger than the fear of punishment. And the military's failures make things even worse. Commanders often give orders that don't make sense or lead soldiers into real danger. Some units are sent to battles with no clear plan, walking into traps because no one told them what to expect. Communication often breaks down, with radios malfunctioning, batteries dead, and soldiers cut off from their own side. In some cases, they're even hit by their own artillery because commanders don't know where their troops are. These aren't rare mistakes. They happen all the time. Soldiers are told to attack a position, only to find it's already been hit by their own side, leading to deadly mix-ups. When the people in charge can't keep you safe, it's hard to trust them. That loss of trust, even in their own equipment, is a huge factor why soldiers are walking away. What's worse is that commanders aren't just making mistakes, but they're often nowhere to be found when things get tough. Some stay far from the fighting, hiding in safer spots while their men face the enemy alone. Others give impossible orders, then blame the soldiers when things go wrong. There are stories of units begging for help, radioing for evacuation after losing half their men, only to be ignored. Soldiers wait for days, watching their friends die with no rescue coming. This kind of betrayal cuts deep. It's one thing to face a tough enemy, it's another to feel like your own leaders don't even care if you live or die. For many soldiers, this is another moment where they decide they've had enough. For the few commanders who are actually staying with their troops, well, things are bad still. Many experienced officers were killed early in the war or pushed out to make room for loyalists who don't always know what they're doing. The ones left are dealing with soldiers who don't trust them and recruits who don't want to be there. To fill the gaps that are left behind through losses and deserters, Russia is using unreliable groups, such as prisoners, promised freedom if they fight, mercenaries who really only care about money, and even foreign fighters from places like North Korea. These groups are difficult to control, and some members even desert or ignore orders, contributing to the chaos. The Russian army is becoming a mix of people who don't belong together, led by officers who can't keep them in line. Back home, the soldiers' families are dealing with their own struggles. The Russian government is putting pressure on wives, mothers, and siblings to stay quiet about the war. If they ask where their loved ones are or why they haven't come home, they're often told to stop talking. Some are threatened with losing their jobs or having their children taken away. And these aren't empty threats. The government follows through, and some families have faced arrest just for speaking out. This is meant to keep everyone in line, to stop families from encouraging their sons or husbands to run, but it's backfiring. Soldiers hear about their families being harassed, and it makes them even angrier at the system they're fighting for. Put yourself in their shoes and question, why would you risk your life for a government that threatens your own mother? It's just crazy. However, for those soldiers who decided to stay and fight, well, the reality is often grim. Due to all these factors we've discussed, many units are losing men fast. Right now, an estimated 1 million Russian casualties have been recorded in this war. That's a huge number. It's like having the entire population of Dallas, Texas wiped out. To replace them, Russia is drafting new recruits. But they aren't trained soldiers. They're regular people, some in their 40s or 50s, others fresh out of school with almost no preparation. They get a few weeks of basic drills, are handed old rifles that don't always work, and are sent into a battle against experienced fighters with modern equipment. Couple that with terrible gear, and their chances of survival keep dropping. These men are thrown into the same chaos as the veterans, but with even less chance of walking out. It's no wonder why so many are just running away, some before they even reach the front lines. It gets even worse for those who get hurt in the fight. Some soldiers, even after being wounded, aren't allowed proper recovery time. They're patched up just enough to walk and then forced back into combat. Many have been sent straight back from hospital tents into trenches with bandages still fresh and limbs barely working. Medics don't always have the power to stop it. Orders come down fast, and if a soldier can still hold a rifle, they're declared fit for duty. Soldiers have seen men with shrapnel wounds dragged into trucks and driven to the front line. That kind of treatment isn't rare. It's becoming the norm. These aren't just harsh policies, they show how desperate the Russian military has become. When an army starts recycling its wounded, it's not just a sign of cruelty, it's a sign that they're running out of men. And when you're injured and still forced to fight, the idea of running away starts to feel like the only way to survive. However, desertion is not an easy thing to do. And in the case of the Russian military, it carries a huge risk. Soldiers can't just walk away and go home. Running means facing prison, exile, or worse. Many are put in impossible positions with impossible choices, and ultimately for thousands, staying in the war feels even more dangerous. So despite these risks, they try their luck. Some slip away on foot, moving through forests or fields at night to avoid Russian patrols and Ukrainian checkpoints. Every step is a gamble, where one wrong move could mean getting caught or killed. Others try to outsmart the system, pretending to be injured to get sent to a hospital where they might slip away during the transfer. In some areas, civilians in Russian-controlled parts of Ukraine help out, offering food, a place to hide, or directions to safer routes. These people take big risks themselves, but they see the desperation in the soldiers' eyes and they want to step in. There are also secret networks, often on apps like Telegram, that share tips on avoiding checkpoints or passing as a civilian. These lifelines give soldiers a chance to get out, even if it's not easy. We'll talk more about these in just a second. For those who proceed to escape successfully, some choose not to keep their escape quiet. Some go public after reaching safety and talk about the chaos they saw, the lies from their leaders, the pointless deaths, and the betrayal by their own side. These men describe a military that's falling apart, where soldiers are sent into battle with no plan and no support. One of the most well-known cases is Gleb Karakulov. He worked as an officer in Russia's Federal Protective Service, setting up secure communication for the country's top leaders. In 2022, he fled to Turkey with his family. He said he could no longer support what he called a criminal war. Now, living in exile, he openly criticizes the government and hopes his decision encourages others to speak out too. Then there's Igor Volobuyov. He used to be a top executive at Gazprom Bank. He's originally from Ukraine, and when the war began, he decided he couldn't stay in a country attacking his birthplace. In 2022, he left Russia and went to Kyiv, asking for Ukrainian citizenship and even trying to join their military. Since then, he's been public about Russia's tactics and how dishonest the whole operation felt from the inside. Not all defectors are high-level insiders, though. Most are regular soldiers who were right on the battlefield. A soldier known as Silver, who operates drones for Russia's Storm Z units, defected in 2024. He said he saw his own commanders kill both civilians and their own men. That was enough for him to switch sides. As if to act out in one final show of rebellion, Silver blew up his unit's headquarters before escaping. Talk about burning your bridges. He now fights with a Russian group helping Ukraine and has spoken out about what pushed him to escape. But even before these relatively recent rebels, we saw signs of disillusionment. In 2022, a paratrooper named Pavel Filatyev abandoned his post and published a detailed report about what he experienced. He talked about his unit stealing from homes just to survive, and said they often had no food or working equipment. His story was raw and disturbing. Another case is Daniil Flokin. He didn't just leave, he also confessed to crimes while serving in Ukraine. He blamed the leadership and said he couldn't take part in a war which he didn't believe in anymore. All of these men had different roles. Some were soldiers, some worked in government or business, but the one thing they shared was the moment they realized they couldn't be part of this war any longer. Their stories show how deeply broken things are inside of Russia's war effort. They weren't rebels to begin with, but the war made them speak out. Luckily for these brave souls who wish to escape, help has been coming to aid in this process. Ukraine has created a way for Russian soldiers who want to escape the war. Since 2022, they've been running a project called I Want to Live. It gives soldiers safe paths to surrender or defect. The plan uses phone lines, online channels, and even messages dropped by drones to reach troops directly. The goal is simple: help soldiers leave the battlefield and come into Ukrainian custody safely. Some end up joining a group called the Freedom of Russia Legion. Others receive protection, and thousands have already taken this route. Ukraine isn't just helping with escape, it's also using public messages to encourage soldiers to quit the war. These campaigns show real examples of defectors being treated well. That's made it easier for others to trust the process. There have even been cases where families were brought back together through outside support. These stories aren't just about war, they're about showing soldiers that choosing to walk away won't mean being punished. One former soldier, whose voice was later used anonymously in Ukrainian media, said, "They promised medals, but all I saw was blood and frostbite. When I heard about the hotline, I knew it was my only shot." Another one said, "I would have rather died trying to escape than stayed one more day. Ukraine didn't shoot me, they gave me soup and a phone call." It's quite touching if you ask me. Outside of Ukraine, other places have started helping too. Georgia and Kazakhstan have opened their borders to people avoiding the draft and those leaving the military. Since the war began, hundreds of thousands have arrived in both countries. Even though some face problems with visas, many have found safety for now. The message is clear. There are places willing to help. France has also stepped in, offering shelter to some of the better-known defectors. One of them leads a group that helps soldiers escape and find asylum. He works closely with authorities in the West and lives under their protection. His job is to connect escapees with safety and to tell their stories so others know they're not alone. Together, these efforts make it harder for Russia to keep its soldiers in line. For every person who escapes, the system loses a little bit more control. And that's the kind of shift that changes everything. This support from Ukraine and other nations gives soldiers hope, but the path to freedom is still fraught with danger. However, despite the many stories of these successful runaways, getting out isn't easy, and not everyone makes it. Some soldiers reach neighboring countries like Armenia or Kazakhstan, where they can blend in or ask for asylum. A few make it to Europe, hoping to start over as refugees, but many don't get that far. Russia's government is cracking down hard. Since 2022, new laws have made desertions a serious crime, with punishments of 10 to 15 years in prison. Even surrendering to Ukrainian forces is now treated as treason, which can mean a lifetime behind bars. Military police patrols bases and transport routes, and checkpoints are set up near borders to catch runaways. For those who get caught, the consequences are brutal. They're often locked in makeshift jails, which are basically tents or metal containers with little food, no heat, and facing constant threats from guards. Some face an even worse punishment, being sent to Storm Z units. These are special groups made up of deserters, prisoners, and anyone the military wants to punish. They're given the most dangerous missions, like charging enemy front lines with no backup, knowing that they're unlikely to survive. The idea is to scare other soldiers into staying, but it's not working. When you know getting caught means a suicide mission, running feels like the only choice. There are even stories of soldiers being killed outright to send a message to others. The fear they create is real, and it's driving more men to take the risk of escape. The government's harsh rules show how desperate things have really got. This crisis isn't just about the soldiers who run. It's hitting families and communities back home as well. In some regions, conscription isn't just harsh, it's targeted. Reports show that men from poor rural towns, ethnic minority communities like Buryats, Dagestanis, and Tuvans are being drafted at far higher rates than those in Moscow or St. Petersburg. These are groups the state thinks it can pressure more easily, and they're paying the highest price. For many, it feels less like service and more like being disposable. In small towns and cities across Russia, people are starting to talk more openly about the war, even though it is risky. The draft is making things worse and raising anxiety levels all around. Russia is running out of willing fighters, so the government is forcing men into service. People of all ages, from teenagers to men in their 50s, are being pulled from their homes or jobs with little warning. Some get a letter. Others are just grabbed off the street. Almost everyone knows someone who's been sent to the front or who's disappeared trying to escape. This is changing how people see the government. They used to trust that their leaders would take care of them, but now they see a system that threatens them instead. It's even estimated that in 2024, over 100,000 young men fled Russia to avoid the draft. And that number is likely higher now in 2025. That is silent resistance at its finest. This resistance is growing in quiet ways. In rural areas, families hide their sons when recruiters come around, sending them to relatives or keeping them out of sight. In cities, small groups are forming to help young men avoid the draft. Some of these networks operate under names like Go by the Forest, a nod to the old Soviet descent tactic of hiding from the state. They use encrypted messaging apps and encrypted PDFs disguised as harmless documents. One such group leaked maps and bus routes used by military recruiters, helping dozens dodge forced conscription. These underground movements are becoming the new face of Russian civil resistance. Not loud protests, but carefully planned sabotage. They share tips on safe routes out of the country, or ways to make fake medical conditions. These networks are risky, and anyone caught helping a draft dodger faces jail time. Despite this, they're spreading because people are desperate. The government's threats, like arresting families or jailing deserters, aren't stopping this. Instead, they're making people angrier. The more the Kremlin tries to control everyone, the more they push back. It's not a loud rebellion, but it's a sign that people are starting to say no in their own way. Now, as you might imagine, the government hates this and is trying everything to stop it. State media calls deserters cowards or traitors, saying they're letting Russia down. They push the idea that the war is still winnable, that it's about protecting the country. But people aren't believing it like they used to. The internet, even with heavy censorship, is full of stories from soldiers who've run. These messages spread fast, especially among younger people who already doubt the government. The Kremlin has tried to block apps like WhatsApp and Telegram, where soldiers and draft dodgers share information, but people find ways around it. The more the government tries to silence these voices, the louder they get. It's a losing battle for the Kremlin, and it's showing how little control they really have. As if all this chaos isn't enough, this crisis is hitting Russia's economy hard. The war was already expensive, but losing so many young men is making it worse. That's a huge blow to a country that needs workers. Factories can't find enough people, construction projects are stalling, and small towns are turning quiet as families leave to join their sons abroad. The government continues to spend on the war, but it's neglecting schools, hospitals, and roads. People notice this, and it's adding to their frustration. They're starting to feel like the government cares more about fighting than about keeping the country running. This crisis is also changing how the world sees Russia. Other countries are noticing the military's weaknesses. Allies like China or Iran might still work with Russia, but they see the cracks. Countries that rely on Russia for weapons or support are starting to question whether it can really deliver. Meanwhile, nations opposing Russia, like those in NATO, see the desertions as a chance to push with harder sanctions or support for Ukraine. Russia's reputation as a strong power is taking a hit. A country that can't keep its soldiers fighting doesn't look like a superpower. This could make it harder for Russia to influence the world in the years ahead. especially if the war keeps draining its resources. The war itself is feeling the impact. Ukraine is taking advantage of Russia's weaknesses, hitting areas where units are short on men or morale. They're using information, sometimes from soldiers who've switched sides, to strike key targets. This makes it harder for Russia to hold the territory that it's taken. In Bakhmut, Russian lines collapsed faster than expected in parts where fresh recruits simply refused to push forward. In Kharkiv, entire squads pulled back without orders, leaving gaps that Ukraine was quick to exploit. These aren't isolated cases, they're warnings. If the desertions keep growing, Ukraine could gain more ground, not just in battles, but in the bigger picture for the war. For Russia, this raises a tough question. How long can they keep fighting when their own soldiers are leaving? The government might have to scale back or even pull out in some areas, which would be a huge blow to their image at home and abroad. Inside of Russia, the government is struggling to keep control. The desertions are a sign of something bigger. Russia's military isn't just losing men, it's losing the trust that holds it together. For years, the government built its power on the idea of strength. But now, with soldiers running and families turning against the war, that idea is crumbling. The Kremlin is trying to hold it together with threats and propaganda, but it's not working like it used to. When your own soldiers would rather face prison than fight, when your own people are hiding their kids to keep them safe, you're not just losing a war, you're losing the trust that keeps a country together. What happens next really depends on how Russia handles this. If the desertions keep growing, the military might not be able to keep fighting. This could force the government to negotiate with Ukraine or give up some ground. But backing down would make the Kremlin look weak, especially after calling the war a fight for Russia's survival. On the other hand, more drafts and punishment could push even more people away. The government is running out of good choices. Every soldier who runs, every family that resists, makes it harder for the Kremlin to keep going. This isn't just about the war in Ukraine. It's about a country at a turning point, where the choices made now could shape what Russia becomes for years to come. Even the soldiers still holding the lines are showing cracks. They know their comrades are vanishing, and that support is thin. Some stay out of fear, others out of habit, but more are just counting the days. Their silence, their stares, and their escape plans all point to the same truth: that whatever loyalty once existed is drying up fast. Their choices, to stay, to run, to resist in small ways, are a reminder of what this war is costing. It's not just about battles or territory. It's about people who are promised something worth fighting for, and found only lies. Their decisions are sending a message that reaches far beyond the war, showing a country struggling to hold itself together. This story is still unfolding, and it's one that will matter for a long time. Because when an army starts running from its own country, the cracks aren't just on the battlefield, they're in the foundation.